Hello, my name is Zachary Cush, and I just spent a week playing Darkest Dungeon 2, Early Access. Did I think it was good? Well, let's spend however long this video ends up being trying to find out. Let's ask, then answer the question, Darkest Dungeon 2. Is it good? I must admit that I've been quietly hyped for this game ever since its first teaser trailer, released in February of 2019. This hype generated itself out of my stark love for the original Darkest Dungeon. I could talk for maybe around 2 hours straight about how much I love Darkest Dungeon 1, though for now, let me summarize my love into a pithy, relevant statement. Darkest Dungeon 1 has a delicious combat system. Darkest Dungeon 1 gave me a turn-based combat system that my soul has been thirsting for ever since my childhood days of Pokemon Yellow and Final Fantasy VII. I also deeply admire its makers, Red Hook Studios, the brainchild of co-founders Chris Barassa and Tyler Sigmund. I have a lot of professional respect for these two people. They seem to me just to be two buds who had a neat idea and put in the hours and hours of thankless work it takes to make a neat idea into a reality. In the staggering darkness that is slowly yet perniciously consuming all of the video game industry, Red Hook and its founders stand as a bulwark of unalloyed good. They're a fabulous reminder that games are created by creative people who both love games and have a neat idea. Or, to put it more elegantly, games are created by people and not by corpos. The soulless, faceless, dehumanizing crunch monster corpos have run the video game show for so long that it has been an intermittent breath of fresh air to check in on the flesh and blood humans at Red Hook turning their neat idea into a tangible work of art in the time which has spanned since February 19th, 2019 and the game's early access release on October 26, 2021. The corpos have sunk their vampiric teeth into my beloved Obsidian Entertainment, and I will weep ugly tears when Microsoft finally murders them. And Microsoft will murder them, but I still have hope that Red Hook will survive unmurdered by corpos. I honestly and truly wish for Red Hook Studios to be the pioneers of a new AA video game development scene. I hope that they will be the primordial mammals surviving the death of the AAA dinosaurs. It's too late for Obsidian. We'll get 5 or 6 more great games out of them before Microsoft murders them.
And Microsoft will murder them.
But it's not too late for Red Hook. I will expand upon this next point at greater length in a future installment of the Why I Love series, but for now, it's safe to say that I have long engaged in a nonsense ritual of forming my own idioms. Most English idioms are trash and horribly outdated, so I think it'd be a fun experience in this particular linguistic community if we could revamp, rephrase, and reinvent our idioms. I can get into a list of my propositional idioms at some other time, though for now I will assure you that most of them are stupid on purpose. But this next one is one I'm actually kind of proud of. The bad artist thinks they're too good to give the audience what they want. The middling artist gives the audience something they've already had. And the great artist gives the audience something they didn't know they always wanted. By this metric, I am proud to announce that Chris Barassa, Tyler Sigmund, and all the fine folks who made Darkest Dungeon 1 are great artists, and they have earned my undying admiration. As an aspirational great artist myself, I often look to people I admire to see if I can discern some kind of trade secret that I can steal and replicate. In 2016, Chris Barassa and Tyler Sigmund taught me that this was a fool's errand. There is no shortcut to becoming a great artist. Becoming a great artist isn't even something that you can do on purpose. Listening to Chris Barassa and Tyler Sigmund talk about their great work of art, Darkest Dungeon 1, in the same tone that my mom would use to discuss a trash television show she half remembers, like, say,
Grey's Anatomy,
taught me that one valuable key ingredient for creating great art is absolute confidence in the value of the work. Chris Barassa and Tyler Sigmund trust their work to speak for itself. I was humbled by their chill, down-to-earth discursive tone when discussing their creation. They never really talk about themselves outside of necessary discussion of their influences or professional pedigree. They always make sure to point out the instrumental efforts of other persons, such as programmers and sound designers, inviting these people to take pride in their mutual ownership over the hours and hours of thankless work it took to make their neat idea into a reality. They speak frankly and honestly about the game's organic, messy development. However, they are always steadfast in their assertion that the idea they had was great. And they crafted a game whose every thread is an ironclad, unassailable argument that their idea was great. Since 2016, Chris Barassa and Tyler Sigmund have represented to me the very paradigm of a good working artist. Humble, honest, human, and possessing an unshakable confidence in their work. To desire to be creative and create great art is to become comfortable with diligence, uncomfort, taking risks, vulnerability, and possessing ostensibly unshakable confidence. It takes a minimum of one human soul to make anything good. That's why everything the soulless corpos make is garbage. It also makes me think about my own best friend in the whole world, Cotton Hensley. And it makes me wonder why the two of us have never made anything together so bold and confident and good as Darkest Dungeon. I dream of the day that I too can work on a game or a film or an album or a novel or maybe even a successful YouTube channel with my best friend in the whole world. Perhaps one day in the foreseeable future, one of these avenues will reveal itself to me here in reality. In other words, I don't care if Darkest Dungeon 2 is an Epic Games Store exclusive. Of course I'm gonna buy it on day one. Red Hook deserves both my trust and my money, more than literally any other game studio in the world. So without even considering for even an instant that I wouldn't, I bought Darkest Dungeon 2 on day one and played it as much as I could for about a week. So, after all that, do I think it was good? Well, sure, it is pretty good for an unfinished first draft. Okay, so that sounded pretty snippy, so let me back up a bit. When I say that Darkest Dungeon 2 is pretty good for an unfinished first draft, that is not meant as some kind of backhanded compliment. An unfinished first draft is literally what they're selling to me right now, and I bought it. Look, allow me the self-indulgent pleasure of citing another one of my idioms. I have only ever watched one full episode of Adventure Time, but I have heard Jake the Dog's line, sucking at something is the first step to being sort of good at something. Emboldened by the exact emotion contained within this line, I used its essence to craft a spiritual successor, which is more focused on the act of creating. You can't make something good out of nothing, though you can make something good out of something bad. I'll admit that I crafted that idiom in order to trick exactly myself into spending 6 years writing the first installment of my future New York Times best-selling novel series, A Century of Ash. When I started that process, what I wanted to create was something good out of nothing. Instrumental to my own journey of turning a neat idea into something that exists in reality was letting go of this notion. No one can make something good out of nothing. The first draft of my now complete novel was incomprehensible garbage. It was bad. However, through honest conversations with myself and advice from people I trusted and the thankless hours and hours of work it takes to revise and edit and restructure a meticulously crafted work of fiction, I am now confident enough in that work of fiction that I will both talk about it earnestly in a video I'm presenting to strangers, and I'm emailing other strangers asking them if they would like to spend the hours and hours of thankless work it takes to sell my manuscript to a publisher so that I don't have to do that. I wouldn't have gotten anywhere close to as far as I have gotten now if I hadn't made my peace with writing a bad first draft. So when I say that Darkest Dungeon 2's first draft is actually pretty good, you now know that I mean that as a tremendous compliment. Granted, Darkest Dungeon 2 is capitalizing a lot off the work that Darkest Dungeon 1 did in the same way that spending those 6 years writing the first entry in my future New York Times best-selling novel series, A Century of Ash, has made writing the second entry kind of a breeze. But if Darkest Dungeon 1 is a delicious pot roast your significant other cooked just to be nice to you, then Darkest Dungeon 2 is a delicious prime rib steak cooked to a perfect medium rare. Much of the ingredients are the same, but the techniques, cooking apparatus, and end results are going to be much different. So what's good about Darkest Dungeon 2 Early Access? The combat. And for a game that is mostly combat, that's a pretty good thing to be good about the first draft of your game. Darkest Dungeon 2 takes Darkest Dungeon 1's brain-delicious combat and boils it down to its perfect essentials. Darkest Dungeon 2's combat looks better, it feels better, it's simpler, it's sleeker, it's next gen. The tokens are a genius addition. Most of the skills in every playable hero's kit are useful. Now, I found myself putting the leper in my party, and the leper in Darkest Dungeon 1 sucks.
Leper is an absolute pile of garbage. The leper is the worst class in the game. The leper is not worth using or playing with ever, and the leper is a complete disgrace to the team and should be shot, never recruited, and not let in the team.
The leper in Darkest Dungeon 2 still kinda sucks. Darkest Dungeon 2 offers a decent salad bar's worth of enemy variety, as well as tasteful and unobtrusive nods to the original. I screamed whenever the antiquarian showed up as a bad guy. I screamed when I suddenly found myself fighting the Shambler again. He kicked my butt. I screamed when I finally clicked on the sluice as a place to venture and found myself fighting pig boys in the Warrens again. I yelled loudly when I found a shard of that comet monster who turned me into mincemeat so many times. I melted into pancake batter once I realized that,
Dude,
the runaway is the Vestal, dude. I love the token system. I love all the new kinds of abilities that the heroes have, except for the lepers. I love the new stuff they added to the occultist. That must be why you unlock him last. I love how wildly the developers have embraced party movement. I love watching my lads and lasses dancing around stabbing freaks. I love my dauntless horses. I named the one on the left Tinkerbell and the one on the right Tungsten. I love these animations. I love the way the game looks. In other words, Darkest Dungeon 2 is pretty good for an unfinished first draft. However, it's still a first draft, and you know what that means. Some things in Darkest Dungeon 2 suck. However, I'm happy to report that most of what sucks about Darkest Dungeon 2 can be fixed by just adding more stuff to the game. And since it's in early access, adding more stuff is literally what the folks at Red Hook are going to do for the foreseeable future. It occurs to me that I could channel my inner Yahtzee Croshaw and be performatively petty about all of the stuff that I didn't like about my time with Darkest Dungeon 2. I could go on and on about how I didn't really have any fun with the game until my 7th run, 6 hours into playing it. I could talk about how every boss in the game is trash. The sleeping giant fight is boring, the librarian is uninteresting, and the harvest child will just kill you effortlessly. The rewards for these boss fights are almost always worthless, so the answer to the question of how do I handle these bosses is don't bother. I could talk about how wildly unbalanced some of the areas are. The Photor wrecked my shop, no matter how many skills I'd mastered or what my party comp was. But I could beat the Tangle in my sleep. I could talk about how the game adds more diseases and negative quirks as you level up your profile. That's ridiculous, since when is a penalty a reward? I could also talk about how every character's flashback fight sucks, except for the Plague Doctors. The Plague Doctors are pretty good. I could go on, though I try to be a bigger person than that. Instead, I've wrapped all of my qualms with Darkest Dungeon 2 into one easy-to-remember phrase. Daddy, or in this case, daddies, let baby boy unlock more stuff between runs. Now, let's talk about permanent progress for a minute. Permanent progress is the lifeblood of any roguelike, and it's what we're here for. Darkest Dungeon 1 is not necessarily a roguelike, though it's not necessarily not a roguelike. However, permanent progress came in many small but perfectly tangible forms. You had building upgrades, districts, trinket collection, defeating bosses, weapon leveling, armor leveling, skill leveling, traversing and non-repeatable endgame dungeons. You know, stuff that was permanent and made your efforts worthwhile. Darkest Dungeon 2's permanent upgrades, meanwhile, include 1. Unlocking new heroes, 2. Unlocking new abilities for those heroes, and That's it. Yes, you unlock more trinkets you can find, more quirks you can acquire, more diseases, but all of those are pretty much just penalties, and opening yourself up to more penalties is not a reward. Everything else that is sort of a reward, trinkets, positive quirks, Wainwright upgrades, they're unreliable. And in the harsh world of Darkest Dungeon, unreliable equals worthless. That's why the leper sucks in Darkest Dungeon 1.
And should be shot.
In Darkest Dungeon 1, it takes about 20 minutes to complete a dungeon crawl. In those 20 minutes, you could lose a hero or two, or have one of your heroes come down with a chronic case of the bad times. However, for your efforts, you would get some money, some scraps of paper to read, a fancy new trinket or two to have forever, and maybe enough heirlooms to upgrade one of your buildings permanently. A dungeon run could go badly, but even in losing, you felt like you were getting something. Spending a maximum of 20 minutes losing in Darkest Dungeon 1 always made me want to try again, and use some of the cool stuff that my friend the bounty hunter died so that I could get. Spending 3 hours in Darkest Dungeon 2 getting to the penultimate area only to die miserably to the cornucopia munch boss baby, and all I have to show for it is one new skill for one of my characters, made me think,
I could have spent those 3 hours doing something meaningful with my life.
so daddies, give baby boy more stuff. The cardinal complaint I carry is that I'm not getting enough reliable, interesting stuff in exchange for the time that I'm putting into Darkest Dungeon 2. I'm aware that literally nobody is asking, but here's my armchair developer solution. Introduce a new collectible resource which can be acquired through accomplishing various feats during a run, like clearing an area, defeating a boss, forming a friendship, stuff like that. We'll call it Resolve. Upon a new run, the player can spend their Resolve tokens to, say, purchase additional upgrade tokens to unlock better skills quicker. They could purchase specific trinkets, maybe those character-exclusive trinkets, and use them for the remainder of the run. They could boost a character's defenses, or raise their HP, increase their minimum stress threshold by 1, or increase the bud meters between 2 characters. The further a player got in their previous round, then the more Resolve tokens they acquire. The player would never acquire so many Resolve tokens that they can just purchase everything and trivialize their next run, though starting a new run right after losing 3 hours of progress to the boss baby in the penultimate area would feel less bad if I could at least tell myself,
Well, I unlocked a bunch of stuff to use on my next run.
So I'm going off script here for a little bit to talk about the third section because there isn't really enough stuff in here to justify typing a script. The astute among you will notice a pattern of the good, the bad, and now the ugly. The good and the bad sections are pretty self-explanatory. It's the stuff I liked and the stuff I didn't like, whereas the ugly is reserved for more things that I find like philosophically or spiritually disgusting. I'm happy to announce that there isn't anything in Darkest Dungeon 2 Early Access that I find disgusting, though contained within this review, I feel, has to be some kind of recommendation as to whether or not you should purchase Darkest Dungeon 2 Early Access. And part of the philosophy, like part of the philosophical problem with purchasing Darkest Dungeon 2 for $30 right now, is that you're basically purchasing a promise. Is the game worth $30 in its current state? Not even a little bit. Will it be worth $30 later on down the line? Almost certainly. I have the utmost faith and the utmost confidence in this game studio and its creators that they will give me what I paid for. However, you have to ask yourself if this is a risk that you're willing to take, if you're willing to buy a promise. But everything else there is it's a decision that you have to make for yourself. Also, put the Houndmaster in the game, you freaks. You put the Bacon Brothers, you put the Pig Boys in the game, but you're not going to give me my Houndmaster. I want a dog. I want a dog both in real life and in my fantasies. So, first update, let me fight a different endgame boss. I see what you're doing with the denial thing, and give me the Houndmaster. I will give up the Crusader gladly for the Houndmaster. Also, make new classes. You don't have to bring back the Bounty Hunter. You don't have to bring back the Arbalist. Like some new classes or like revamped classes. Like the Runaway is pretty clearly the new Vestal, and I like that a lot. So like revamping the old characters into something new would be really interesting. Anyway, that's all I got. Keep up the good work, everybody, and I'll see you later. I'll see you in the future. All right. Bye-bye. Bye-bye now. Bye-bye. Bye now. Bye-bye. I dream of the day that I too can work on a game or a film or an album or a novel or an Amber Alert.